The Newsroom. More than half a century after France's former African colonies gained their independence, there is one nation of 4 million at the heart of the continent that repeatedly grabs headlines for all the wrong reasons. This Thursday, the new strongmen in the Central African Republic struggling to restore order after yet another coup. There's reported looting going on still. Michel Djotodia and his Seleka coalition seizing the city last Sunday, forcing President François Bozizé to flee to Cameroon. Paris quickly dispatching forces who control the airport, this with an eye to ensuring the safety of its 1,200 foreign nationals there. A reminder of a past that includes one French-trained strongman who in the 1970s declared himself emperor and whose gifts of diamonds contributed to the loss of Valéry Giscard d'Estaing in his re-election bid in 1981. It was the French who, by the way, eventually overthrew Jean Bedel Bokassa. This time, though, the French have mostly kept a low profile. Instead, it's South African forces that have been in the firing line, losing 13 soldiers in fighting, raising questions over Pretoria's bilateral ties with Bangui, the South African press pointing to the Central African Republic's oil, diamonds, uranium, and other riches. Why this coup? What spillover effect for a region rich in resources, but whose people remain dirt poor? Today in the France 24 debate, why the coup in the Central African Republic? With us to talk about it, France 24's Ebba Kalondo. Welcome back to the debate. Welcome to Julia Owono of Global Voices Online and Internet Without Borders. Tell us about Internet Without Borders.
Yes, it's the English equivalent of Internet Sans Frontières.
All right, and you're an advocacy group for
digital liberties, but also internet as a tool for change, social change.
Okay, also with us, Emmanuel Dupuy. He's the president of the Defense and Security Analysis think tank, the Institute for Prospective and Security Studies in Europe. Welcome to the debate. Joining us from the University of California at Berkeley, anthropologist Louisa Lombard. Thank you for joining us today. The France 24 debate, where you can always join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Now, just 2 months ago, he was signing a peace deal. Today, Michel Djotodia is in Bangui, in the presidential palace, where he suspended the constitution.
Michel Djotodia is living out a lifelong dream to be president of the Central African Republic. He says he's got a long list of things to do before organizing elections in 3 years. To speed up the process, he suspended the constitution and is ruling by decree.
This transitional government will have the following priorities: to restore peace and security, to reorganize defense and security efforts, to reorganize the territory's administration, to reform the judicial system, to make economic and social reforms, and organize municipal, legislative, and presidential elections.
The 64-year-old rebel leader always had big aspirations. After studying in the Soviet Union, Djotodia ran for parliament twice and lost. Instead, he entered the civil service, first in the planning ministry, followed by the foreign ministry, where he was sent to neighboring Darfur as consul. It's there that Djotodia had his first contact with Chadian rebels who were suspected of helping CAR rebels fight the government in Bangui. In 2006, 3 years after François Bozizé's coup d'etat, Djotodia helped found the Union of Democratic Forces for Unity, a rebel group in the northeast. The UFDR said they were fighting for more government investment in the country's north, but in the peace agreements that followed, rebel leaders accepted to be placed in Bozizé's government instead. When Seleka launched its offensive last year, Bozizé thought he could appease rebel leaders the same way. In January, when Djotodia signed the peace agreement in Libreville, he was named Minister of Defense. But this time, the rebels wanted to take Bangui with Seleka, a motley crew of rebel factions, including the UFDR, that were founded at different times in different parts of the country with different leaders. Besides getting rid of Bozizé, they have little to unite them. Just days after Djotodia took power, another rebel leader, Paris-based Nelson Djader, is threatening to fight for the CAR's top post.
All right, so 2 months ago they sit down at the table, and now there's the rebels who've swept down on the capital with relative ease. Louisa Lombard, in the piece you pen in the Christian Science Monitor, you make Jotodia almost seem like, I guess you could say, an accidental coup leader, this Soviet-trained former tax office director who's popped up, it seems, in a number of places.
I mean, to call him an accidental coup leader, I think that that's a little bit misleading. I think Jotodia was someone who had first the aspiration. He wanted to be president. He wanted to have that kind of political control. And he had the connections. By serving as consul in Niala in South Darfur, he was able to get to know some of the men in arms, some of the former Chadian rebels, some of the various people, armed elements who live and work in that area. Many of whom, although they don't live on Central African territory in any kind of a settled way, do have family connections to that area and other kinds of connections to the area, and so were willing to work with him to take power in Bangui. And what we've seen in Central African Republic in recent years is that there's sort of a continual steady state of rebellions against whoever is in power. It is only when those rebel groups are able to make the connections with especially Chadian men in arms that they are successful. So that's what we saw with now former President Bozizé when he took power in 2003. There were a few Central Africans who were with him as rebels to take the capital, but by far the majority of the people who helped him take power were Chadian.
By far, most of them were Chadian. Ebba Kalondo.
I think yes, that's correct.
I think what Louisa just said is extremely important in the sense that the CIAR is almost just a geographical location, but the people who come towards it are mostly not. And when you talk about people who take power and come from mostly the north, like Jotodia, are people who have cultural and other links from other areas, whether it be the DRC, whether it be Chad, whether it's Sudan.
We can even call up the map, his coalition coming from the northeast of the country, from two specific provinces that are very far, you can see on that map, from the capital.
There you go. There you go, absolutely. And this is where a lot of the gold riches of the Central African Republic reside, also to uranium, but also the place which was also used as a launching pad for proxy rebel organizations from around the area, whether it be the DRC, whether it be the Chad or Sudan. So, and then of course there's the Lord's Resistance Army. You must also remember, apart from the people
the Lord's Resistance Army over in Uganda.
Although you have people who are fighting for a purported rebel cause in and around the Central African Republic, within the Central African Republic you have foreign military organized groups, whether it be the Central African Economic States, who have 700 troops there. You've got the South Africans with 200, and of course you've also got the Ugandans who are tracking Joseph Kony with at least 150 and a little bit more US special troops. So you've got a conflagration of very many people with very different interests over this little small place, which has an extreme strategic importance for very many causes around the Great Lakes and Central Africa.
The Central African Republic, when you look at it, compared to, for instance, your native Cameroon, where Paul Biya has been in power for more than a quarter century, there's been stability there, you might say, as far as that goes. Why is it that it's this patchwork where no one ever seems to get along, and they don't? The idea of a centralized state just never seems to gel.
Well, what we've unfortunately been witnessing for several years now in Central African Republic is a fight between politicians, so-called politicians, I call them so-called politicians, mainly leaders who are much more interested in their personal interests, because aside from being, as Ebba was just saying, it's a very strategic region, which a lot of resources, but also a geostrategic fortress, I would call it, for all the Lake Chad Basin and the Great Lake region as well. So, and historically, northeast of Central Africa Republic has always been a transhumance zone where even now poachers who are coming from Sudan, Janjaweed poachers who are coming from Sudan are going to Cameroon, to Chad, to poach elephants, whose ivory is used to fund armed rebellions in the region. So it's always has been this abyssal issues which have never been solved, mainly because there has never been a leader with a political vision and other than his personal interests and economic interests. So.
Right. By Monday morning, Sure, go ahead, Louisa Lombard.
I just like to jump in a little bit there because I think that with these kinds of questions, it's really important to understand a little bit about the history of the Central African Republic. If we go back about 100 years, the French came very late as colonizers to the Central African Republic. They didn't really set up shop until the early 20th century. At that point, they had no money left. And so they decided that to rule by the cheap and hopefully make a little bit of money at the same time, they would lease the country's territory to different concessionary companies so that it would be run in a very privatized manner. This didn't end up working. The French didn't make very much money off of it, and the concessionary companies didn't really either. But it meant that throughout their time in the country, the French made very, very few investments in terms of infrastructure, in terms of schools, in terms of healthcare, in terms of anything, really. So at independence, what you had was a very small administration based in the capital, and then some outposts of government, offices in the rural areas, but not very much, very, very little. And if we look at, in particular, the northeastern region, where this Seleka rebel coalition comes from, for much of the colonial area, that was run as a kind of autonomous zone because it was so far and so remote that it couldn't really be expected to abide by whatever directives were coming out of the capital. So, then we have independence. The country has never really had all that much money to be able to invest in building up the things that it would need in order to look like the kind of rational bureaucratic state that
hang
we
on
might
a second.
expect in the
Hang on,
West.
just one second. Louisa Lombard, you say never had
Sure.
much money, but there's all these riches: uranium, gold, diamonds, oil.
There are these riches, but the kind of concessionary mentality that was put into place during the colonial era has remained. So that what the government sees its role as doing is negotiating concessions with foreign companies so that those companies will come in and exploit these riches. And then whoever is in charge at the time who negotiates those concessions is able to take certain kickbacks and make some money off of that. But the benefit doesn't really go to the public in the way that we might hope. At the same time, the country does have huge riches, but at the same time, many of those resources are quite difficult to exploit. So, for instance, the oil is in a very remote part of the country. There aren't really any roads to get there. So it would require massive infrastructural investment in order to make that a real concern. The diamonds that are Exactly, and the diamonds that are in the country also, for that matter, are at this point almost entirely artisanally mined. So we're not talking about the kind of massive diamond mining productions or gold mining productions that you could see elsewhere.
All right,
It's
so
just not-
it's
the
this hot
resources
potato.
don't
The way you
exist in
describe
those
it, then
ways.
it's this hot potato that the French have carried since the colonial era. By Monday morning, the French seem, by the way, to have long given up on the now ousted François Bozizé.
We are following events in the Central African Republic hour by hour. As you know, there's been an attack by a movement called Seleka. President Bozizé had promised to do a certain number of things. He didn't do them. He left the country.
Emmanuel Dupuy, you listen to the French foreign minister. It sounds like the French had given up on Bozizé.
Well, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs has mentioned it, we are having great expectations after the Libreville agreement in January, and we were hoping that Bozizé would apply what he promised to do. Again, as you mentioned in the presentation, he was supposed to do a government of national union. He was supposed to integrate the Senegal rebels. We were speaking about the Ministry of Defense. We were speaking about the Prime Minister, who has been confirmed, lawyer Nicolas Zangai. We were speaking again of a situation in which France has never given up on Central Africa. But you have to take in consideration that for a long time, Central African government did not want anymore the presence of French troops. The Boali, which still is present in the country, was not accepted at one time by President Bozizé. As you know, France has sent 300 more soldiers in order to protect its citizens, its expatriates, and in order to allow those who want to leave the country. But I wanted to...
But hold on, let's stay on this point, because when he became president, just as when his predecessor became president, François Hollande said it's finished the era of what the French call La France-Afrique, this cozy relationship with its former colonies, and Central African Republic. When it comes to Central African Republic, how much of that statement do you think is true?
I think it's totally true. It's totally true because it's a coup d'etat, which has happened. So we cannot say that France is not doing anything. As you know, African Union has launched a certain number of, has forbidden a certain number of movements. 7 of the Seleka members are not allowed to go out of to travel in Africa. As you know, the Peace and Security Commission of African Union has said quite honestly and quite frankly that the constitutional union, constitutional honor must be restored, and France, again, must take in consideration one geopolitical reality, and we have mentioned it before, which is the role of Chad. Chad is doing and playing a game elsewhere in Mali. 2,500 soldiers are present in Mali, and therefore President Déby withdrew a certain number of troops, which were more useful for its global strategy or its sub-regional strategy elsewhere. And this led to the conclusion that Seleka could do a fast move towards the capital, as it has been doing on and out from 2007 to this extent. So I would say that I didn't respond to your question because President Bozizé asked for the intervention of France, as President Diankunda Traoré has done it for Mali, but we're not in the same situation.
And the French only responded by protecting their own foreign nationals.
Absolutely, because they were not endangered.
All right, and it's interesting. So Chad, neighboring Chad, has troops that are over in Mali helping the French, and that's a key element to understanding why there's a coup in the Central African Republic.
I don't know whether that's completely true, but Chad has always been a very strong player in Central African or contemporary Central African Republic politics, in the sense that, Bozizé also came into power with the help of Idriss Déby Itno, the president of Chad, and also just because the Chadians have, like many states around, there's lots of incursions by Chadian rebels, whether they were for or against.
Right. And that geopolitical patchwork extends way beyond the part of Central Africa. It goes all the way to South Africa, as we'll see in part 2 of the France 24 debate.